Psychology of Learning, How We Acquire Knowledge. Extended 19-minute audio script, 5,130 words. Introduction, The Miracle of Learning. Every moment of your life, you are learning. As you listen to these words, your brain is forming new neural connections, storing information, and integrating it with your existing knowledge. Learning is perhaps the most fundamental human capability. It's what allows us to adapt, grow, survive, and thrive in an ever-changing world. But what exactly is learning? At its core, learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior, knowledge, or skill that results from experience. It's not just about memorizing facts or mastering academic subjects. Learning encompasses everything from a baby's first steps to a scientist's groundbreaking discovery, from acquiring a new language to developing emotional intelligence. The psychology of learning has been one of the most extensively studied areas in psychology for over a century. Researchers have uncovered fascinating insights about how we acquire, store, retrieve, and apply knowledge. They've discovered that learning is far more complex and nuanced than simply absorbing information like a sponge. Instead, it's an active, constructive process that involves multiple cognitive systems working together in sophisticated ways. Understanding how learning works isn't just academic curiosity. It has profound practical implications. When we understand the mechanisms of learning, we can optimize educational practices, improve training programs, design better learning technologies, and help individuals overcome learning challenges. We can also understand why some learning approaches work better than others and how to match teaching methods to individual learning styles and needs. Today, we'll explore the rich landscape of learning psychology, from the foundational theories of classical and operant conditioning to modern insights about cognitive styles and learning disorders. We'll discover how memory techniques can enhance learning, why we forget what we've learned, and how motivation drives the learning process. Whether you're a student, educator, parent, or simply someone interested in optimizing your own learning, this journey will provide valuable insights into one of psychology's most important domains. Classical conditioning, learning through association. Pavlov's revolutionary discovery. Classical conditioning, discovered by Ivan Pavlov in the early 1900s, represents one of psychology's most fundamental learning principles. Pavlov's famous experiments with dogs revealed that learning could occur through simple associations, fundamentally changing how we understand behavior and learning. While studying digestive processes in dogs, Pavlov noticed that dogs began salivating not only when they saw food, but also when they heard the footsteps of the researcher bringing food. This observation led him to systematically investigate how neutral stimuli could acquire the power to trigger responses through repeated pairing with meaningful stimuli. In his classic experiments, Pavlov presented dogs with a neutral stimulus, a bell, just before presenting food. Initially, the bell elicited no salivation response. However, after repeated pairings of the bell with food, the dogs began salivating in response to the bell alone, even when no food was present. This demonstrated that learning could occur through association, without any conscious effort or understanding on the part of the learner. The mechanisms of classical conditioning. Classical conditioning involves several key components that work together to create learned associations. Unconditioned stimulus. UCS. This is a stimulus that naturally triggers a response without prior learning. In Pavlov's experiments, food was the UCS because it naturally caused dogs to salivate. Unconditioned response, UCR. This is the natural, unlearned response to the unconditioned stimulus. Salivation in response to food is an unconditioned response. Conditioned stimulus, CS. This is a previously neutral stimulus that, after being repeatedly paired with the unconditioned stimulus, comes to trigger a learned response. The bell became a conditioned stimulus in Pavlov's experiments. Conditioned response. CR This is the learned response to the conditioned stimulus. The dog's salivation in response to the bell alone was a conditioned response. The process works through temporal contiguity. The conditioned stimulus must occur close in time to the unconditioned stimulus for association to develop. The most effective conditioning typically occurs when the CS precedes the UCS by a brief interval, usually less than a second. Factors affecting classical conditioning. Timing. The temporal relationship between stimuli is crucial. Forward conditioning, where the CS precedes the UCS, is most effective. Simultaneous conditioning is less effective, while backward conditioning rarely produces learning. Contingency. The predictive relationship between stimuli matters. If the UCS occurs frequently without the CS, conditioning is weakened because the CS doesn't reliably predict the UCS. Intensity. Stronger unconditioned stimuli typically produce stronger conditioning. A loud noise will condition faster than a soft sound. Salience. Some stimuli are more easily conditioned than others due to biological preparedness. For example, it's easier to condition fear responses to snakes or spiders than to flowers or houses. Phenomena in classical conditioning. Acquisition. The initial learning phase when the association between CS and UCS is established. Learning typically follows a negatively accelerated curve, rapid initial learning that gradually levels off. Extinction. When the CS is repeatedly presented without the UCS, the conditioned response gradually weakens and disappears. However, extinction doesn't erase the original learning. It creates new learning that inhibits the original association. Spontaneous recovery. After extinction, if time passes without exposure to the CS, the conditioned response may reappear at reduced strength when the CS is presented again. Generalization. Stimuli similar to the original CS can also elicit the conditioned response. A dog conditioned to salivate to a specific tone might also salivate to similar tones. Discrimination. Through differential conditioning, organisms can learn to respond to specific stimuli while not responding to similar but different stimuli. Applications and implications. Classical conditioning has profound applications across many domains. Phobia development. Many fears and phobias develop through classical conditioning. A child who experiences pain during a medical procedure might develop fear of medical settings through association. Advertising and marketing. Companies use classical conditioning by pairing their products with positive stimuli like attractive models, pleasant music, or appealing imagery to create positive associations. Therapy. Systematic desensitization uses classical conditioning principles to treat phobias by gradually pairing feared stimuli with relaxation responses. Education. Teachers can use classical conditioning to create positive classroom environments by associating learning with pleasant experiences and positive emotions. Addiction. Drug tolerance and withdrawal symptoms often involve classical conditioning. Environmental cues associated with drug use can trigger cravings and physiological responses. Modern understanding. Contemporary research has revealed that classical conditioning is more complex than originally thought. It's not simply automatic stimulus-response learning, but involves cognitive processes like attention, memory, and expectation. The brain actively processes the predictive relationships between stimuli rather than mechanically forming associations. Neuroscientific research has identified brain circuits involved in classical conditioning, including the amygdala for emotional conditioning, the cerebellum for motor conditioning, and a hippocampus for contextual conditioning. These discoveries have enhanced our understanding of how conditioning works at the neural level. Operant conditioning, learning through consequences. B.F. Skinner's behavioral revolution. Operant conditioning, developed and refined by B.F. Skinner, represents another foundational principle of learning psychology. Unlike classical conditioning, which focuses on reflexive responses to stimuli, operant conditioning explains how voluntary behaviors are shaped by their consequences. Skinner's approach was based on the principle that behaviors followed by positive consequences are more likely to be repeated, while behaviors followed by negative consequences are less likely to recur. This principle, known as the law of effect, was originally formulated by Edward Thorndike but was extensively developed and applied by Skinner. Skinner conducted thousands of experiments using specially designed chambers, known as Skinner boxes, where animals could perform specific behaviors and receive various consequences. These controlled environments allowed precise study of how different types and schedules of consequences affect behavior. Components of operant conditioning. Operant behavior. These are voluntary behaviors that operate on the environment to produce consequences. Unlike reflexive responses in classical conditioning, operant behaviors are emitted rather than elicited. Reinforcement. Any consequence that increases the likelihood of a behavior being repeated. Reinforcement can be positive, adding something desirable, or negative, removing something undesirable. Punishment. Any consequence that decreases the likelihood of a behavior being repeated. Like reinforcement, punishment can be positive, adding something undesirable, or negative, removing something desirable. Extinction. In operant conditioning, extinction occurs when a previously reinforced behavior no longer receives reinforcement, leading to a gradual decrease in the behavior's frequency. Types of consequences. Positive reinforcement. Adding a pleasant stimulus after a behavior to increase its likelihood. Examples include praise for good work, money for completing tasks, or food for desired behaviors. Negative reinforcement. Removing an unpleasant stimulus after a behavior to increase its likelihood. Examples include taking pain medication to relieve discomfort or wearing a seatbelt to stop the annoying beeping sound. Positive punishment. Adding an unpleasant stimulus after a behavior to decrease its likelihood. Examples include giving extra chores for misbehavior or imposing fines for traffic violations. Negative punishment. Removing a pleasant stimulus after a behavior to decrease its likelihood. Examples include taking away privileges, removing access to preferred activities, or timeout procedures. Schedules of reinforcement. Skinner discovered that the timing and frequency of reinforcement dramatically affect learning and behavior maintenance. Continuous reinforcement. Every instance of the target behavior is reinforced. This produces rapid learning, but also quick extinction when reinforcement stops. Partial reinforcement. Only some instances of the behavior are reinforced. This produces slower initial learning, but greater resistance to extinction. Fixed ratio. FR reinforcement occurs after a fixed number of responses. This produces high, steady response rates with brief pauses after reinforcement. Variable ratio. VR reinforcement occurs after an unpredictable number of responses. This produces the highest and most consistent response rates and is highly resistant to extinction. Fixed interval. FI reinforcement is available after a fixed period of time has passed. This produces a scalloped pattern of responding, with increased activity as the reinforcement time approaches. Variable interval. 6 reinforcement is available after unpredictable time periods. This produces steady, consistent response rates. Shaping and complex behaviors. Shaping is the process of gradually developing complex behaviors by reinforcing successive approximations to the target behavior. This technique allows the teaching of behaviors that might never occur naturally. For example, training a dolphin to jump through a hoop begins by reinforcing the dolphin for swimming near the hoop, then for touching it, then for partially going through it, and finally for completely jumping through. Each step builds on the previous one until the complex behavior is achieved. Shaping is widely used in education, therapy, sports training, and animal training. It's particularly valuable for developing skills that require gradual refinement and practice. Applications in human behavior. Education. Token economies in classrooms use operant conditioning principles to motivate learning and appropriate behavior. Students earn tokens for desired behaviors that can be exchanged for preferred activities or items. Parenting. Effective discipline strategies often apply operant conditioning principles, using consistent consequences to shape children's behavior while maintaining positive parent-child relationships. Workplace management. Performance management systems, incentive programs, and feedback mechanisms in organizations often reflect operant conditioning principles. Therapy, applied behavior analysis, ABA, uses operant conditioning extensively to help individuals with autism, developmental disabilities, and behavioral disorders acquire new skills and reduce problematic behaviors. Self-management. Individuals can apply operant conditioning principles to change their own behaviors, such as using reward systems for exercise, study habits, or breaking bad habits. Limitations and criticisms. While operant conditioning is powerful, it has limitations. Cognitive factors. Modern research shows that thinking, expectations, and beliefs significantly influence how consequences affect behavior, beyond simple mechanical associations. Individual differences. People respond differently to various types of consequences based on personality, values, and past experiences. Intrinsic motivation. External reinforcement can sometimes undermine intrinsic motivation, particularly for activities people naturally find enjoyable or meaningful. Ethical concerns. The use of punishment and external control raises questions about autonomy, dignity, and long-term effects on motivation and self-concept. Complex human behavior. Many human behaviors involve multiple motives, social factors, and cognitive processes that can't be fully explained by operant conditioning alone. Social learning. Learning from others. Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory. Social learning theory, developed by Albert Bandura, revolutionized our understanding of how people learn by demonstrating that much of human learning occurs through observation, imitation, and modeling rather than direct experience. This theory bridged the gap between behavioral and cognitive approaches to learning. Bandura's famous Bobo doll experiments in the 1960s provided compelling evidence that children could learn aggressive behaviors simply by watching adults behave aggressively toward an inflatable doll. Children who observed aggressive models later displayed similar aggressive behaviors when given the opportunity, even without any direct reinforcement for doing so. This research challenged the dominant behaviorist view that learning required direct experience and reinforcement. Instead, Bandura showed that people could learn complex behaviors, attitudes, and emotional responses through observation alone, a process he called vicarious learning. Key components of social learning. Attention. Learning through observation requires focused attention on the model's behavior. Factors that increase attention include the model's attractiveness, competence, status, and similarity to the observer. Retention. Observed behaviors must be stored in memory for later use. This involves both visual and verbal coding systems that help preserve the behavioral information. Motor reproduction. The observer must have the physical and cognitive capabilities to reproduce the observed behavior. This may require practice and refinement. Motivation. The observer must be motivated to perform the learned behavior. This motivation can come from anticipated consequences, vicarious reinforcement, or intrinsic satisfaction. Types of models. Live models. Real people demonstrating behaviors in person. These are often most powerful because they provide rich, multisensory information and can adapt their demonstrations based on the learner's needs. Symbolic models. Behaviors demonstrated through media such as books, television, movies, or digital content. These models can reach large audiences and provide consistent demonstrations. Verbal models. Instructions or descriptions of behaviors without visual demonstration. These are less effective for complex behaviors, but useful for conveying rules, strategies, or concepts. Observational learning processes. Modeling, direct imitation of observed behaviors. This is most common in children learning basic skills, social behaviors, and cultural practices. Inhibition and disinhibition. Observing consequences of others' behaviors can increase or decrease the likelihood of similar behaviors in observers. Seeing someone punished for behavior tends to inhibit similar behavior, while seeing someone rewarded tends to increase it. Facilitation. Observing others can remind observers of previously learned behaviors and prompt their performance in appropriate situations. Innovation. Observers don't just copy behaviors exactly, but often adapt, modify, and combine observed elements to create new behaviors. Factors affecting social learning. Model characteristics. Competence. Skilled, expert models are more likely to be imitated. Status. High-status models receive more attention and imitation. Similarity. Models perceived as similar to the observer are more influential. Warmth. Friendly, caring models are more likely to be emulated. Observer characteristics. Self-efficacy. Belief in one's ability to perform the observed behavior. Motivation. Interest in learning and performing the behavior. Attention capacity. Ability to focus on and process the model's behavior. Previous experience, relevant background knowledge, and skills. Situational factors. Consequences, observed outcomes of a model's behavior. Context, environmental factors that support or hinder learning. Practice opportunities, chances to rehearse and refine observed behaviors. Applications in education. Classroom modeling. Teachers serve as models for academic skills, problem-solving strategies, and social behaviors. Effective teachers demonstrate not just what to do, but how to think through problems. Peer learning. Students learn effectively from observing and working with classmates. Peer tutoring and collaborative learning capitalize on social learning principles. Video and media. Educational videos, simulations, and multimedia resources provide consistent, high-quality models for learning complex skills and concepts. Role-playing. Students practice social skills, conflict resolution, and professional behaviors through structured role-playing activities that provide safe opportunities for observation and practice. Social learning and development. Language acquisition. Children learn language primarily through observing and imitating the speech of others, gradually refining their verbal skills through social interaction and feedback. Moral development. Children develop moral reasoning and behavior by observing how others handle ethical dilemmas and the consequences of various moral choices. Gender role learning. Much of what children learn about gender-appropriate behavior comes from observing same-sex models in their environment, including parents, peers, and media figures. Cultural transmission. Social learning is the primary mechanism through which cultural practices, values, and traditions are passed from one generation to the next. Technology and social learning. Digital modeling. Online tutorials, instructional videos, and virtual demonstrations provide new opportunities for social learning across geographical and temporal boundaries. Social media learning. Platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram have become informal learning environments where people share skills, knowledge, and experiences. Virtual reality, VR technology can provide immersive social learning experiences, allowing learners to observe and practice behaviors in realistic but safe environments. Online communities, digital communities of practice enable social learning through shared experiences, peer feedback, and collaborative problem solving. Limitations and considerations. While social learning is powerful, several factors can limit its effectiveness. Inappropriate models. Exposure to poor models can lead to learning of undesirable behaviors, attitudes, or techniques. Passive learning. Pure observation without active practice and feedback may lead to superficial learning that doesn't transfer to real-world situations. Individual differences. People vary in their ability to learn through observation based on cognitive abilities, personality traits, and learning preferences. Cultural factors. Social learning effectiveness can vary across cultures based on different values placed on imitation, independence, and social hierarchy. Cognitive styles. Individual differences in learning. Understanding cognitive styles. Cognitive styles refer to consistent individual differences in how people perceive, think about, remember, and solve problems. Unlike cognitive abilities, which refer to how well someone can perform cognitive tasks, cognitive styles describe preferred ways of processing information. These styles are relatively stable across situations and time, though they can be influenced by experience and context. The concept of cognitive styles emerged from recognition that people with similar intelligence levels often approach learning and problem-solving very differently. Understanding these differences has important implications for education, training, and personal development, as it helps explain why certain teaching methods work better for some learners than others. Cognitive styles exist on continuums rather than as discrete categories. Most people show tendencies toward particular styles while retaining flexibility to adapt their approach based on task demands and circumstances. Major cognitive style dimensions. Field dependence versus field independence. This dimension, identified by Herman Witkin, describes how people separate relevant information from its context. Field-dependent learners tend to see information in context and have difficulty separating parts from wholes. Prefer collaborative learning environments. Be more socially oriented and sensitive to social cues. Excel at learning that involves interpersonal relationships. Need external structure and guidance. Field-independent learners tend to easily separate relevant information from distracting contexts. Prefer individual learning approaches. Be more analytical and impersonal in their thinking. Excel at restructuring and organizing information. Provide their own structure and direction. Verbal versus visual processing. This dimension describes preferences for processing information through language versus imagery. Verbal processors prefer written and spoken explanations. Sequential, step-by-step presentations. Abstract, symbolic representations. Discussion and verbal rehearsal. Linear, logical organization. Visual processors prefer diagrams, charts, and graphic representations. Spatial relationships and patterns. Concrete, imagery-based examples. Visual memory aids. Holistic Gestalt organization. Sequential versus random processing. This describes preferences for information organization and presentation. Sequential processors prefer logical, step-by-step progressions. Clear organization and structure. Building knowledge systematically. Detailed explanations of connections. Linear presentation of material. Random processors prefer jumping between topics and making connections. Discovering patterns and relationships independently. Learning through exploration and discovery. Connecting new information to personal interests. Nonlinear, web-like organization. Learning style models. VRK model. Neil Fleming's VRK model identifies four primary learning preferences. Visual, learning through graphs, charts, diagrams, and spatial representations. Auditory, learning through listening, discussion, and verbal explanations. Reading/writing, learning through text, note-taking, and written materials. Kinesthetic, learning through hands-on experience, movement, and manipulation. Kolb's learning styles. David Kolb identified four learning styles based on how people prefer to perceive and process information. Converger combines abstract conceptualization with active experimentation, prefers practical applications. Diverger combines concrete experience with reflective observation, excels at brainstorming and seeing multiple perspectives. Assimilator combines abstract conceptualization with reflective observation, strong at creating theoretical models. Accommodator combines concrete experience with active experimentation, learns through trial and error. Multiple intelligences. Howard Gardner's theory suggests people have different types of intelligence, each representing different ways of processing information. Linguistic intelligence, word smart. Logical mathematical intelligence, number smart. Spatial intelligence, picture smart. Musical intelligence, music smart. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence, body smart. Interpersonal intelligence, people smart. Intrapersonal intelligence, self smart. Naturalist intelligence, nature smart. Implications for learning and teaching. Matching versus mismatching. Research on matching instruction to learning styles shows mixed results. While some matching can be helpful, particularly for initial learning, mismatching can also promote cognitive flexibility and deeper learning. Style flexibility. Effective learners develop the ability to adapt their cognitive style based on task demands. Teaching students to recognize when different approaches are needed builds metacognitive awareness. Complementary approaches. Using multiple instructional methods that appeal to different cognitive styles ensures that all learners can access information through their preferred channels while also developing alternative approaches. Individual recognition. Understanding cognitive styles helps educators and learners recognize that struggles with certain approaches don't indicate lack of ability, but may reflect style mismatches. Cultural and contextual influences. Cultural differences. Cognitive styles can vary across cultures based on educational traditions, social structures, and cultural values. Collectivistic cultures may emphasize more field-dependent approaches, while individualistic cultures may favor field-independent styles. Educational context. Different academic disciplines may favor particular cognitive styles. Sciences often reward field-independent, analytical thinking, while arts and humanities may value more field-dependent, contextual approaches. Developmental changes. Cognitive styles can evolve throughout development, with children generally showing more field-dependent tendencies that may become more differentiated with age and experience. Criticisms and limitations. The cognitive styles concept faces several criticisms. Limited research support. Many learning style models lack strong empirical support, and research on matching instruction to styles shows inconsistent results. Oversimplification. Complex cognitive processes may be reduced to overly simple categories that don't capture the full richness of individual differences. Fixed mindset risk. Labeling learners with specific styles might limit their willingness to try different approaches or develop new capabilities. Commercial exploitation. The popularity of learning styles has led to numerous commercial products with questionable scientific support. Best practices for application. Despite limitations, cognitive style concepts can be useful when applied thoughtfully. Assessment awareness. Understanding your own cognitive preferences can help you recognize when to adapt your approach or seek alternative methods. Instructional variety. Using diverse teaching methods ensures broad appeal while helping all learners develop multiple approaches. Metacognitive development. Teaching learners about different cognitive approaches helps them become more strategic and flexible in their learning. Individual consultation. One-on-one discussions about learning preferences can help identify effective strategies for specific individuals. Mnemonics, the art of memory enhancement. The ancient art of memory. Mnemonics, derived from the Greek goddess of memory Mnemosyne, refers to techniques and strategies designed to improve memory and learning. These methods have been used for thousands of years, dating back to ancient Greece when orators needed to memorize lengthy speeches without written notes. The classical method of loci, or memory palace technique, attributed to the Greek poet Simonides, involves associating information with specific locations in a familiar building or route. This technique was so effective that it became the foundation of medieval education and remains one of the most powerful memory techniques today. Modern cognitive psychology has validated many traditional mnemonic techniques while also developing new methods based on our understanding of how memory works. These techniques leverage fundamental principles of human memory, such as organization, association, visualization, and meaningful encoding. Types of mnemonic techniques. Acronyms and acrostics. These verbal mnemonics use letters to represent information. Acronyms create memorable words from the first letters of items to be remembered. Examples include homes for the Great Lakes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior, or PEMDAS for the order of mathematical operations, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Acrostics create memorable sentences where each word begins with a letter of the item to be remembered. My very eager mother just served us 9 pizzas. Helps remember the planets in order from the sun, including Pluto when it was still classified as a planet. Rhyme and rhythm mnemonics. These techniques use the natural appeal of music, rhythm, and rhyme to enhance memory. Popular examples include 30 days hath September, April, June, and November for remembering days and months, or I before e except after C for spelling rules. The rhythmic and melodic qualities make information more memorable and retrieval more automatic. Visual imagery mnemonics. These techniques leverage our powerful visual memory system. The method of loci involves mentally placing items to be remembered in specific locations along a familiar route, then mentally walking the route to recall the items in order. The link method creates vivid, often bizarre, mental images that connect items in a sequence. For example, to remember a grocery list starting with milk and bread, you might visualize milk pouring over giant slices of bread. The PEG system uses pre-memorized rhyming words, pegs, to hang new information. The rhyme: 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a tree, provides pegs for remembering ordered lists. Keyword method. This technique is particularly effective for vocabulary learning and foreign language acquisition. It involves finding a keyword that sounds like the foreign word, creating a mental image linking the keyword with the English meaning, using the keyword as a bridge to recall the foreign word's meaning. For example, to learn that carta means letter in Spanish, you might visualize a shopping cart filled with letters. The psychology behind mnemonics. Elaborative encoding. Mnemonics work by encouraging deeper, more elaborate processing of information. Instead of simple rote repetition, mnemonics force the creation of meaningful connections and associations. Multiple retrieval pathways. Effective mnemonics create multiple routes to the same information. A visual mnemonic might also include verbal, spatial, and emotional components, providing several ways to access stored memories. Organization and structure. Many mnemonics impose organization on otherwise random information. This structure makes information easier to encode, store, and retrieve systematically. Distinctiveness. Unusual, bizarre, or emotionally charged images are more memorable than ordinary ones. Effective mnemonics often incorporate surprising or humorous elements that make information stand out in memory. Existing knowledge integration. The best mnemonics connect new information to existing knowledge structures, making unfamiliar material more meaningful and accessible. Advanced mnemonic systems. The major system. This sophisticated number-to-word conversion system assigns consonant sounds to digits, 0 to 9, allowing numbers to be converted into words and then into memorable images. For example, the number 32 might become moon, 3 equals m, 2 equals n, which can then be incorporated into vivid mental imagery. The Dominic system, developed by memory champion Dominic O'Brien. This system converts two-digit numbers into people performing actions, creating memorable scenarios. The number 23 might represent Michael Jordan, MJ equals 23, performing his characteristic action of slam dunking. The person action object, PAO, system, used by many memory athletes. This system represents three-digit numbers as a person performing an action on an object, creating rich, memorable scenes. Applications in education. Subject-specific applications. Mnemonics can be adapted for virtually any subject. Science. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally for order of operations in math. History. Narrative chains connecting historical events chronologically. Language learning. Keyword methods for vocabulary acquisition. Medicine. Anatomical mnemonics like some lovers try positions that they cannot handle for wrist bones. Study strategies. Students can learn to create their own mnemonics, developing metacognitive awareness of what memory techniques work best for different types of material. Test preparation. Mnemonics are particularly valuable for standardized tests requiring memorization of facts, formulas, and procedures. Technology and modern mnemonics. Spaced repetition software. Digital tools like Anki combine mnemonic principles with spaced repetition algorithms, optimizing review timing based on forgetting curves. Memory apps. Mobile applications make mnemonic training more accessible and gamified, encouraging regular practice of memory techniques. Virtual reality. VR technology can create immersive memory palaces, allowing users to build and navigate three-dimensional mnemonic environments. Adaptive learning systems. AI-powered platforms can identify individual learning patterns and suggest personalized mnemonic strategies. Benefits and limitations. Benefits. Dramatic improvement in recall for specific types of information. Enhanced confidence in memory abilities. Development of creative thinking through imagery creation. Better understanding of memory processes. Limitations. Time investment required to learn and apply techniques. Most effective for specific types of information, facts, lists, procedures. May not improve understanding or critical thinking. Can create over-reliance on techniques rather than developing natural memory. Training memory skills. Progressive development. Memory training should start with simple techniques and gradually build to more complex systems as proficiency develops. Regular practice, like physical exercise, memory training requires consistent practice to maintain and improve abilities. Application variety. Using mnemonics across different subjects and contexts helps build flexible memory skills and demonstrates their broad utility. Metacognitive awareness. Learning about when and why different techniques work helps students become more strategic in their memory use. Forgetting and interference. Why we lose what we learn. The paradox of forgetting. Forgetting might seem like a failure of our learning and memory systems, but modern research reveals it as an adaptive feature that helps us function effectively. If we remembered everything with equal clarity, our minds would be cluttered with irrelevant details, making it difficult to focus on important information and make efficient decisions. Hermann Ebbinghaus, one of psychology's pioneers, conducted the first systematic studies of forgetting in the 1880s. Using himself as a subject, he memorized lists of nonsense syllables and then measured how much he could recall after various time delays. His research revealed the famous forgetting curve, a steep initial decline in memory, followed by a more gradual loss over time. Ebbinghaus discovered that without rehearsal or use, we lose approximately 50% of newly learned information within the first hour, about 70% within 24 hours, and roughly 80% within a month. However, this curve can be modified by factors such as meaningfulness of material, learning method, and subsequent review. Theories of forgetting. Decay theory. This theory suggests that memories naturally fade over time due to the gradual deterioration of memory traces in the brain. Like footprints in sand being worn away by wind and waves, and used memories weaken and eventually disappear. While decay likely plays some role in forgetting, research shows it cannot account for all memory loss. Some very old memories remain vivid while more recent ones fade, and memories can sometimes be recovered after apparent loss, suggesting they weren't completely decayed. Interference theory. This theory proposes that forgetting occurs because other memories interfere with retrieval of target information. There are two types of interference. Proactive interference occurs when old learning interferes with new learning. For example, if you've driven a car with manual transmission for years, the old motor patterns might interfere when learning to drive an automatic transmission. Retroactive interference occurs when new learning interferes with recall of old information. Learning a new phone number might make it harder to remember your old number. Retrieval failure. This theory suggests that information isn't lost from memory, but becomes inaccessible due to inadequate retrieval cues. The information is still stored but can't be found without the right key to unlock it. The tip of the tongue phenomenon illustrates retrieval failure. You know something but can't quite access it. Often, providing a small cue or hint can suddenly make the information available. Types of interference. Similarity-based interference. Information that is similar to what we're trying to remember creates more interference than dissimilar information. Learning Spanish and Italian simultaneously creates more interference than learning Spanish and mathematics. Temporal interference. Information learned close in time tends to interfere with each other more than information separated by longer intervals. This is why spacing learning sessions over time is more effective than mass practice. Context-dependent interference. Changes in environmental context between learning and recall can interfere with memory retrieval. Information learned in one environment may be harder to recall in a different setting. State-dependent interference. Changes in internal state, mood, arousal, physical condition between learning and recall can create interference effects. Factors affecting forgetting. Meaningfulness. Meaningful information is forgotten much more slowly than meaningless material. Information that connects to existing knowledge, personal experiences, or important goals shows greater retention. Processing depth. Information processed at deeper, more semantic levels is retained better than information processed only at surface levels. Understanding concepts produces longer-lasting learning than mere memorization. Emotional significance. Emotionally charged information, whether positive or negative, tends to be better retained. The amygdala enhances memory consolidation for emotional experiences. Repetition and practice. Repeated exposure and practice, especially when distributed over time, significantly reduces forgetting. The testing effect shows that actively retrieving information from memory strengthens retention more than passive review. Sleep and memory consolidation. Sleep plays a crucial role in memory consolidation. Information learned before sleep is better retained than information followed by waking activity. Different sleep stages contribute to different types of memory consolidation. The constructive nature of memory. Modern research reveals that memory is not like a video recording that plays back exactly what happened. Instead, memory is reconstructive. We actively rebuild memories each time we recall them, potentially introducing changes, distortions, or updates based on current knowledge and beliefs. Schema effects. Our existing knowledge frameworks, schemas, influence what we remember and how we remember it. Information consistent with our schemas is often better remembered, while inconsistent information may be distorted to fit existing beliefs or forgotten entirely. Source confusion. We sometimes remember information but forget where we learned it, leading to source misattribution. This can result in treating unreliable information as credible or vice versa. False memories. Under certain conditions, people could develop vivid memories of events that never occurred.